he just has a really strong code as to what he sees as fair that maybe doesn't match what other drivers see as fair.
I think that there's a puzzle. There's a puzzle to Max, like there is for every driver, that needs to be solved. There's a key to unlock it.
When he was racing Lewis, he was the hunter. There has been a lack of consistency in how they're applying penalties, and sometimes they're looking at the outcome, sometimes they're not.
Is Max Verstappen unraceable?
Oof.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Tired F1 Pod, coming to you just before the British Grand Prix. And today we have a special guest. Take a bow, double waved yellow. How are you?
Doing great. How are you guys doing?
Really good. How are you, Omar?
Yeah, tired, but we're ready to go, right?
Oh, yeah. So after our last video and all of the comments we got from it, we're going to do another Max video.
Because we haven't received enough love already. So here we are. We're back at it, getting abused again. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. But I do have to preface everything to say that since that video, probably my views have softened a little bit. So just take that with you as we go. But I had a question. Just given that we're going into the British Grand Prix, Silverstone, decent amount of overtaking spots, wide open, fast flowing corners, should be good for Red Bull, should be good for McLaren. We're probably going to see some more Max and Lando fun at the front. My question was, is Max Verstappen unraceable?
Oof, wow. You know what? Let our guest answer this question first, because we always get all the love from our viewers. So, Double, go ahead.
So polite.
So, I mean, I hear what you're saying. I think he's definitely harder racer than anyone else on the grid right now. But I think we have enough evidence of him racing hard but fair in other circumstances that he is able to do it when it suits him. I'm thinking back to his battles with Charles in Bahrain and Saudi Arabia in 2022. Great races where they were respectful and played DRS games, and it was really good. I went back and watched the Bahrain battle that Charles got the better of him, and that was fantastic. And it's like, I think he was jazzed about it afterwards too. He seemed like to actually enjoy the fight. I think that he just has a really strong code as to what he sees as fair that maybe doesn't match what other drivers see as fair.
What do you reckon?
I think that's a great take, and very diplomatically put there too, Double. Way to go. I'm with you, right? We talked in the aftermath of the last race that Max just has something where he races Charles a certain way. I don't know if it's just personality, nature, or maybe the fact that they've been really at it with each other for as many years as, there's even footage and pictures and everything to talk about their sort of relationship on the track, at least. So I think that there's that element of it. What's strange is, I mean, we're kind of seeing this whole thing play out with, how do you want to kind of categorize this? Is it British drivers? Should we do Mercedes cars? Like, how do you want to kind of put this? Because you can take your pickings here, but there's certainly something there, right? And I don't know. I mean, it would be totally reckless of me to speculate whether that's the case or he has a bit of a bias. And oh, by the way, I was just thinking about this sort of ironically, right? If he does end up coming to Mercedes a couple of years from now, that will make everything interesting. So I don't think he's unraceable, but I do think he's still the Max that we know. He's not going to give it up, especially to people that he doesn't think, I don't know whether you want to call it deserve it or just doesn't feel like he wants to give up to them in any way, but he will with Charles. And also, oh, by the way, he did kind of the same thing with Carlos too. So I think there's examples of where drivers have been able to take it to him that maybe he's able to, respect that a little bit. And I wonder if it's just that.
I think that's the key though, right? And Double, to what you said about when the situation allows, right? When he feels like he's able to, he races. I'm not even sure it's that. I think that I think there was a lot of he's matured, he's changed over the dominant years since 2021, and actually he probably hasn't. He just races the way he always races because that's how he's raced since he was in karting, and that's just Max. But I think where I've changed is the fact that somebody like Charles has been able to come up against him and race. I think that says more about Charles than it does about Max racing people differently. I think he does the same thing to everybody. I think that there's a puzzle. There's a puzzle to Max, like there is for every driver that needs to be solved. There's a key to unlock it, and I think every driver has that. Every driver defends in a certain way, attacks in a certain way, and every other driver that has to either defend or attack that driver has to understand what the key is to unlock that passing move, or that defending move. And I think Charles just has that because he's been racing him since he was like an 8-year-old. They've been going up against each other for years and years and years and years. We've all seen that video of them as like baby carters where they've had an accident. Max is like, what the hell? And Charles is like, oh, it was just an accident. Like he doesn't get rattled in the same way that certain other drivers do, I think.
We've all talked about this before too, right? But when he was racing Lewis, he was the hunter. He was going after someone that he needed to. I mean, and he's put Lewis in his top 5 list, so we don't have to get into all kinds of stupidity with that. But he really wanted to go get the championship, right? Go hunt him down. And so he was racing a certain way. We're seeing the opposite now, where he's having guys that are, generationally younger, right? In many ways, at least in Formula One terms, that are coming after him. And he's not going to give it up in just the same way that he was going to go out and hunt them. Whereas Charles is more of a peer, right? In more cases than not, given the history. So I think it could just simply be that. It doesn't have to be more than that, does it?
I think it's even less than that. I don't think he changes it for anyone. I don't think it's the fact that he was going up against Lewis. I don't think it's the fact that people are coming.
Well, maybe Charles has his number too, right? Having raced him for a while, they kind of know each other's styles, and whereas that's not true for the other two, right?
Yeah, I think that's it. I think that's it. I think that Charles understands what the game is, how to do it, because he's had to do it for a long time.
I really liked Lando's comments today or Max's comments. Yeah, I mean Lando's comments, but also Max's comments about like the one in particular. He says there's always a human reaction when someone dives up the inside or outside, that you have a bit of a reaction to it. I felt everything that I did was nothing massively over the top. Like how you design a car, you try to go to the edge of the rules. Maybe you find some gray areas here and there as a car, and that's the same as how you race. Otherwise, you'd never be a top driver and you'll never succeed in life anyway.
Yeah.
And I think that's like how he thinks. And then he says, that the other part that he said is you have to realize he's fighting for his second potential win. I'm fighting for my 62nd. I think it's naturally your emotions are a little bit different. So, I think he understands the game. And I do think that Max has a code. And I think that he's very tough. But he's not a Michael Schumacher. Like, I've seen all the comparisons between him and Schumacher. Schumacher would just kind of run you off. Like, I think of Schumacher, a couple of his lesser famous moves. Like, if you look at what he did to Frentzen coming out of the pit lane in Canada in '98, just completely drives people off the road. Like, no pretense of, just you're on the same track as me, get off. And, Michael did a lot of sort of questionable stuff that was very questionable in the moment, or outright like turning into Jacques Villeneuve, obviously, is the big one. I don't see Max as being that. I see him as being like operating in a calculated way on the gray areas, and knowing where his car is placed versus yours, and putting himself in a position where he's in control of the outcome more than you are, in terms of you can run into him, but you're going to incur more damage than he does. And there was a great quote that Max had in 2022 Brazil, where he said, well, you know, I've got a 5-second penalty, but Lewis's race is ruined. And it's like, it's almost like the Marge Simpson meme. It's like, it's true, but you shouldn't say it. It's like, but that's the way he thinks. It's like, okay, I could incur a 5-second penalty here, but I know I'm going to come off best in this move, and it's worth the 5 seconds to me to do that. And if you insist on hanging out the inside on the outside and not giving me space, I'm just going to plunk you. I'm going to park it on the curb on the inside like he did and put Lewis into the barrier. That's basically, you know, you give him the opportunity to place his car. And he said in that interview, basically, I don't have the direct quote right in front of me anymore, but basically, I could tell right from the start he wasn't going to give me space. So I just said, okay, fine. If you're not going to give me space, then, you know, we're not in the same race, and I'm not going to give you any space. And with Charles, it's always like they give each other space because they know they're going to get it. And I think Max knows what he's going to get from Charles, and he's in the process of figuring out what he's going to get from Lando. I think both of them did enough in that incident last weekend. Like, I still think it's on Max. I mean, he's the one who made the contact. But even Lando said in his comments that he had room to move to the left onto the curb. And there's that famous video of Sainz from, I think it's last year or the year before, where he's like Max fully on the curb over on that same corner. And it's like, yes, you could, but you are not obligated to give Max that space. But Max says, you're going to give me that space, and then we're going to see how we exit the corner. Like, and I think that what it was is Max did the fade kind of in that first attempt that Lando had, and Lando got annoyed. Lando retaliated with kind of his move from really far back that was never going to go. And Max said, okay, fine. I'm going to move over to the left and make sure we don't hit. And, you know, I'm going to give you that space, because if Max had held his line, they would have collided on that overtake. But Max says, okay, you did a dive bomb. You came in on me. I moved over. We both went off the track. You give me the place back, but I didn't hit you. And then the next lap, he comes by and he's like, oh, there's Lando, and he's not giving me any space. And I gave him the space last lap. So he's got to, like, he has this code of, and if you read his quote about 2022 in Brazil, it's the same thing, because he has this thing of like, well, I thought Lewis and I had put 2021 behind us, and I thought we could have a good race. And then I go to overtake him, or he comes to overtake me, and he doesn't give me any space. So, you know, I guess it's bygones aren't bygones, and we can't race each other. And it was all a bit petty, but it was like he has this code, and it is internally consistent. I do think that there is consistency in how he faces these situations. I just think that it's very rigid.
That's what I mean. I don't think he's changed. Everyone's driving the same Max Verstappen as they have been for the last 9 years now. But this is it. Whenever we have one of these clash points, it's always because the driver that's coming up against him has drawn a line in the sand. That Lando, I think, after 3 attempts trying to get past him, and the second attempt where he went up the inside, made the corner, and was ahead of Max at the apex, but Max just kept his foot in, went off the track and overtook him, or kept the position. I'm sure that annoyed Lando no end. And your argument is absolutely right. There is space on the outside for Lando to move, but Lando was basically in that moment just saying, I could move, but I'm just not going to. And Max was like, all right, if you're not going to move, well, I'm going to move in on you. And that's the definition of immovable object meets irresistible force, right?
I think this is exactly where Lando's improvement has to come through, right? I mean, we haven't seen him race for wins, right? Almost ever, right? I mean, even the Miami one kind of fell in his lap a little bit, right? So I think what you're seeing is partly that, and I don't think enough was said about him losing his cool and probably not figuring it out, right? Whereas he clearly for that last 10 odd laps had the faster car, had the quicker car, had the better tires. He had everything going for himself. So maybe a smarter thing would have been to kind of, maybe wait and reload too, or do it differently, right? Or he clearly couldn't figure it out in the moment too, right? So and you could see that play out with every attempt that happened there. So I think there's a little bit of that. Whereas again, with Charles, you know he's going to figure out a different way of trying to get past, and even Lewis would have, for that matter, at that point, right? And
okay,
so that's the thing.
That's the point that I want to make, though, right? Is that I don't think it's necessarily to do with Lando being green at the front of a race. I think it's him being green against Max, because I think even Lewis in 2021, it wasn't until after Silverstone, way after Silverstone, that he really understood what the game was, like how he needed to go up against Max, and not, because before that he was backing out of moves, right? You look at Spain, you look at Imola, he just backed out of it. Then he did the Lando thing where he was like, okay, well, I'm going to keep my foot in. And then we had Silverstone, and then he started to understand what he needed to do, and he kept his foot in when he was getting pushed out of, off the track, which is what happened in Brazil. So there was a gradual evolution of how Lewis went up against Max, even in 2021. I think Lando is at that middle stage of that learning process, but it's every driver I think has to do that. It's just that Charles did that when they were karters, so you've not had to see him do it while he's in F1 particularly. But I guess that then, because I've got two parts to this, and I think we're sort of discussing the how you unlock the Max conundrum, the passing Max conundrum. And just to be clear, I don't think this is on Max. This is on other drivers having to understand what they need to do. Because as you say, Double, Max is very consistent in the way he thinks and the way he acts on track. So it's up to other drivers, I think, to work out what they need to do to get past him. But the other thing that, because we talked about this offline a little bit, and I think we probably agree, is what do the governing body need to do about it? Like, does it all need to be litigated? Do we need to tighten up the rules to know so that braking in the moving in the braking zone, pushing your rival off, leaving enough space on the exit, on the entry, on the inside, on the outside, where they are in front of the apex? Does that all need to be as tight as it is for us to have clean racing? Amar, I'm going to come to you on this one first.
Is it tight right now? I mean, by the letter of the law, Max should have been penalized more, right? But that would have, I mean, to me, it would have been unseemly, right? Because I think that this is sort of, it is such a narrow margin for I don't want to call it error, but that decision making, right, where it becomes so subjective, right? What is moving under braking? And if Max believes that he was just doing it ever so slightly versus doing it to a greater degree, right, this is just going to create more controversy. So my take on this is, if you want to be in the controversy business, which the governing bodies generally do feel like they want to be in that, then you go ahead and penalize for every damn thing. But I think you kind of reach that tipping point where you're not allowing racers to race, right? So my general sort of take on this is to let the racing happen, and then just for it to reach a certain threshold where it's egregious. And I hate to say it, but then you kind of then have to punish based on the result, right? I mean, then and that to me is another sort of can of worms in and of itself. But you got to let it go, at least initially, right? I mean, generally what I see happen in other sports too, right, is if there's a foul and then there's a double foul and then so on and so forth, right? So let's see where this sort of evolves, right? Because the rules allow for certain things to be penalized. The question is, will we get the consistency, right? Because that has been my lament throughout the season, is that there has been a lack of consistency in how they're applying penalties. And sometimes they're looking at the outcome, sometimes they're not. And it's just crazy. Now, I do want to say this, since you brought this up, right? I don't think Max necessarily needed to be penalized at 10 seconds for the actual incident that happened. But I think one of the things we've all skipped over is what happens right thereafter, right? As they're getting back on the racetrack and Lando is then trying to pass him. And there's a video of him basically running Lando out wide and off track. I think that could have been penalized because that was very intentional. I think everything before that was just fine. But again, you kind of get into these things where what are you going to penalize, how many times, how often, and then what does that impact look like in terms of racing? So I'd say probably not. Go ahead, Double.
What do you reckon?
Yeah, I agree with you completely on that one, and I'm still like, I've watched the aftermath piece there, and like they're both driving damaged cars, so it's very difficult to say what the intention is. And if I'm a steward looking at that, it's going to be very hard to say he did it on purpose. But I do agree that that's more punishable than the actual contact, which was very incidental contact. And hey, McLaren's got the dagger on the side of their front wing now, so get ready if you hit that McLaren now, because it'll be even worse with the upgraded front wing that they've got the sharp end on now.
Yeah, the Roman chariot.
Yeah, but I just want to say, like, devil's advocate here. And I think you said something very key. You're punishing the result. And is that really fair? So if we're looking at this in isolation, so I think on the first attempt that Lando made, Max did move in the braking zone ever so subtly. And borderline, I would have, if I was the race director, given like a warning flag or something. That's not a penalty, but hey, don't do that, right? And that would have calmed the situation and given Lando the confidence that he could do that again, because he knew if Max faded like that again, that he would get a penalty. Lando completely lost his head because he knew one more track limits infraction was going to put him in 5-second penalty territory, and did that late, like, lunge up the inside anyway, which put him afoul of the track limits penalty, which an unfathomable irony to me that they didn't go on Max and say, look, just let him go, or don't fight too hard because he's going to get a penalty, or that they didn't tell Lando, hey, it's not worth it, you're going to get a penalty. Like, both of them should have been told by the team that the battle was over. I'm glad it wasn't, because it was great TV, and it's great to have these controversies. I know people don't believe that, but it is great for Formula One to have these incidents and aftermaths to discuss. So, I'm not upset that it happened or anything, but I do think the teams should have given both of them better information to avoid that happening. But anyway, to my original point, when Lando did that dive bomb, say, for example, Max didn't yield and Lando had gone off into the side of Max, Lando would have gotten a very severe penalty. And then Max says, no, I'm going to get out of the way because he has to give me the corner. So Max knows that, okay, he made a dumb move. I'm going to get out of the way so he doesn't hit me. And then we'll continue this next lap. And then the next lap happens, and they're in an opposite situation where Max does something questionable, and Lando doesn't back out of it and doesn't initiate contact, but Max gets the 10-second penalty. So I can see in that world where he feels hard done by, because he did everything he could on the previous lap to cooperate and ensure that Lando didn't fall afoul of the regulations. Now he's avoiding because he doesn't want his car to get hit. That's the most important thing.
Yeah.
But in the end, they did end up touching, right? So if you're penalizing the incident, you're basically just saying, well, all those other times where you got out of the way, they don't matter. But that one time where you didn't does, right? And it's like, it almost gives an advantage to the person who's overtaking and a disadvantage to the person who is defending, because you're only punishing if there's contact, and the contact is dependent on how the person being passed reacts. And I do see that as kind of like the problem of penalizing the result is it puts all the onus on the defense, right? Rather than saying, hey, don't dive bomb, whether the guy avoided or not, like now I actually think that they should just let them race and just, not worry about these penalties because they do even out. It's the same way as like if you have, a missed penalty that leads to a goal in football or other sports, if there's a penalty that they don't call and it leads to an opportunity, everybody's mad about it. But if it doesn't, then there's a prevailing feeling of you let them play, right? But it's fundamentally unfair because it's just looking at, again, penalizing the result. And the epitome of that is that what we had with in Australia with Russell and Alonso, where Alonso phantom touched George, right? And you can never tell me that, he meant or didn't mean to do it, or if George could have or couldn't react. But now we're talking about like penalties for just because George crashed. Like, honestly, penalties because someone else did something. Now we're looking at the person in front, and now it's like that was the ultimate in punishing the result. And I really didn't like that, even if there was like, Alonso was playing DRS games, he wouldn't have been the first to do that.
But I think this is a dilemma that the FIA find themselves in all the time, because I think at the moment they do exactly that. They do only really, even though there are all these rules, they only really penalise when there is an accident, right? I have to say I wasn't that fussed about Lando's dive bomb, the one where he went off the track. I think Max probably would have shared a bit of the blame if he turned in at that point. He didn't. So I think, and that's a problem with all of these incidents. It always does take two to tango, and the problem that the FIA have got at the moment is that they're trying to codify the driving regulations in the same way that they codify the technical regulations. And when you do that, people are going to try and find grey areas, and that's what Max does better than anybody else. He exploits that little grey area of uncertainty about what constitutes erratic movement in the braking zone, and he did that to good effect, to the point where, I agree with you. Maybe there should have been a warning, but there's enough ambiguity in the way that he does that the stewards don't feel that even that is legitimate or justified. So I think the technical rules absolutely have to be codified, right? They had to, although even that is an argument for another day. I'm not sure they necessarily have to be as strict as they are, but there's a specific outcome that the FIA are trying to get, right, from the technical regulations. You don't need that from the driving regulations. All you want from the driving regulations is that you have a race, and people do, drivers do what they need to do to get the outcome that they want, and you will see fireworks naturally. So I agree with both of you that I think let them race is the way to do it. Penalise as little as possible. If you do a Michael Schumacher Jerez 1997, I think you probably do deserve to get yourself like thrown out of the championship. But I think all of the stuff that we have right now is a reaction to what happened in the past, that people were allowed to get away with everything. Like you look at Senna in 1990, and you look at their incident in 1989, and you look at Michael getting the world championship in 1994 because of what he did to Damon, and all of those things were let go. And in a social media era, the outcry, if those things were to happen now, would be so great that the FIA would feel that they have to do something. But actually, if they took a step back and said, look, we don't have to be beholden to what happens out there in the fan bases, and just let them drive and let us have the argument rather than them having to wade in and make the argument, you just have much better racing,
Yeah, but
and much more natural racing, I think, where drivers aren't having to second guess or coming on the radio afterwards to go, he pushed me off or he didn't leave me space. I looked again at the
this
the
is all
replay
good
for
stuff, Shaz.
2019.
This is all good stuff. What is bad about
But
this?
they can say
We're all
that.
talking about it. We're all saying and this makes
Yeah.
this next race
Oh, yeah.
intriguing.
Oh, yeah.
And oh, by the way,
Oh,
we
yeah.
want. I want
Yeah.
the. I mean, my only lament in this is Charles is not in the mix. Otherwise, it'd be even better. That's the only thing to be lamented.
He will be.
He had his fun in 2019, and he will be back this
come
season
on.
as well at some point.
you are.
But
just,
that whole radio thing, right? Like, yes, he pushed me off, and that could be an angry to your.
I mean, I just.
But it doesn't have to be a. It doesn't have to be a. This is for Charlie. Tell him to F off, kind of thing. That Vettel does.
But this is so
doesn't have
great
to be
now.
like
I mean,
that.
look at how it's like a TV show. They're like passively trying to tell the stewards, right?
It's not passive.
And then the
It's
engineer
not
comes out and says,
passive.
"Oh yeah, we saw that too. We saw that too. I'm sure it's noted." It's like, okay, great.
I was watching Brazil 2021, the incident between Max and
do tell what happened there. I've forgotten.
Yeah, and it's hilarious because it's like I forgot just how comedy gold Jonathan Wheatley and who was the guy from Mercedes on the radio?
Ron Meadows.
Yeah, Ron Meadows. Yeah. And Michael Massey, and just how pained every word and like fake polite. And it was so funny. It was comedy gold. Like it was one season of hilarity, but man, that was great. It was so funny because they were doing it in the open. It's like, yeah, Jonathan. Yep, yeah, okay, John. Like he was so. It was
degenerative.
I want more of that. I want more of that. What I want to see happen is no comms. One guy from the pit wall has to run with a written complaint all the way across to the steward's office. Every time that happens, imagine how much fun that would be. Like here's Kravitz in the pit lane talking about, hey, there's a Mercedes guy running with this complaint.
They would find a way to sanitize that as well. Like the more it happens, the more sanitized it would get.
Do you remember when?
Like, why are we doing this?
Do you remember ever watching when Mansell ran down the pit lane to yell at the stewards about Senna? Classic.
No, we want more of that. Like imagine that. I mean, that's made for social media. Like imagine having a Red Bull guy and a Mercedes guy running, and I'm going to outrun this guy. I'm going to outrun, and we're going to get there first. And we're going to file this complaint right now.
Going to tell the teacher.
Going to tell the teacher right now. Oh man, you're right. They're going to sanitize that too because
exactly.
They do.
Okay, so if we go back to our original question again, is Max Verstappen unraceable? I'm going to ask both of you for a snap verdict. Amar, 1.
No.
Is he unraceable? No. Double?
Nope. Hard on the line, but not unraceable.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. And in terms of the FIA, I think we all sort of agree that let them race should be the mantra. Minimize penalties. In fact, simplify the code book. Just let them get on with it. And then let us have the battle outside the stewards room. Just finally, in the last sort of 5 minutes or so, maybe I shouldn't have left this right to the end. If you're chasing Max or you're defending against Max, what's your play? How do you get yourself past him or stop him from coming through? Double, you first.
Well, I don't have any talent, so I don't think I'd be able to.
Very good.
To do anything.
Yeah, I love that. That's the best answer.
But
damn it, that was mine too.
But I think Lando has already learned. But I think that the thing that they have to realize is that if you have time, you have to use it. Max is not going to give you an inch, but he will let you by if he's beaten. And I went back and looked at several different moves that were done on Max. I mean, even in Canada, he got overtaken. Like, it happens. He still went on to win that race, but he's not perfect. I think the thing that I would do is Max is not mistake proof. I don't think that he's perfect. I think if you're Lando or anyone who's chasing Max, you have to wait, because Max is prone to getting flustered if he's struggling with something. Everyone is. I think that Max is very controlled. And I mean, I don't think that, this is just with anybody else, you're not going to just sit and wait for the mistake. You're going to force the issue. But with Max, I would kind of wait for that opening. I would wait for that opportunity where he gets something wrong, because he's not immune to it. We saw him make mistakes in Canada. Like, it happens. He's not perfect. And if he's struggling with tires or with pace or with frustration, you can maybe catch him in an opportunity where he doesn't see it coming. Because I think what Lando might have done a little bit wrong is telegraphed it too much. He might have given him too much notice of, like, I think you got to be a little bit cagier than going for it every single lap. Like, you might have to time it a little better. You might have to strategize. You might have to wait for your moment. I think that was how people dealt with Senna too. It's like, he wasn't going to give you anything. So you would just wait for him to make a mistake, and he would make a mistake. Like, he was not perfect. He would make mistakes. And I think that sometimes that's the better approach. I know that sounds like a cop-out, but I think that it's probably patience is what I would recommend when dealing with
that's
him.
the thing. Yeah. Amar?
We already know how to race him. Just look at Charles. That's it. That's who Lando's got to go talk to, or maybe even go talk to Lewis, right? But I think you fight fire with fire, right? Which is what Charles does, and he does it keeping all. It's not just blind aggression. It's not just sending it in. Although this season, I mean, this is Max season, right? What does Lando have to lose? What do the rest have to lose, right? I mean, take a few more chances, see how that works out, and maybe you earn his respect for next year, maybe. And that's maybe a couple of DNFs here and there, and that changes everything altogether. And then maybe that's the way to go. I'm not advocating for anyone getting hurt. Please don't get me wrong, but I'm just advocating for the kind of race that we just had, maybe in the opposite direction too. Because the one thing that's clear, right, this year and now, Red Bull are vulnerable. So this is not just about Max. So maybe the smarter way to race him is to race him as a team. And I think in that regard, McLaren kind of hit the nail on the head in terms of their strategy, the tires they kept. Everything was perfect in that regard too. So maybe you kind of do it that way. And then, as Double said, get Max to make mistakes, because it will happen this year. I mean, he struggled with his tires too, right? In that last exchange of pit stops, he was struggling there too. You could see he had a lockup, and he almost went off track too, even before Lando got there. So he kind of do that. And I think
too, like the thing that I'm looking at when you're racing against Max is that he doesn't have any qualms if you're in the position to take more of the damage from a confrontation. Mm-hmm. So if it's like we said, the 5 seconds is worth it. So he's gonna. If you put yourself in a position, whether it's fair or unfair, if you put yourself in a position where the consequences are greater for you than him, or potentially at least, he's going to take advantage of that. So you need to put him in a position where the consequences are on him. And if you can't put your car into a position where he's facing consequences, then you're going to be at a disadvantage racing him. Like, that's just part of the game. And, they're going to have to realize that it's not worth putting yourself in a position where you're at a disadvantage with Max Verstappen. You have to pick your moments better.
Yeah, agree. Agree with both those things. I think it answers both of our questions about litigation and how to attack him. Has to be aggression, but there has to be patience. And I think that damage thing is not just in terms of damage to your car, but also how likely is it that I'm going to get a penalty for this? I think this is what Max does brilliantly. Where, sure, even in that situation, it was Lando that ended up retiring, and Max that ended up coming fifth. So the man definitely knows what he's doing. And on that bombshell, it's time to call this one quits. But Double thanks so much for coming on. Amara, thank you as always. This was awesome. If you like what we're doing here, as usual, please like, please subscribe, please leave us some comments. What do you think? Is Max unraceable? I'm sure everyone has their views. And we will see you in the next one.
Later.